Hi, and welcome to Data Futurology. In this podcast, we unlock the secrets, tips, tricks, and mistakes of data science leaders from around the world. With that, obviously, you can learn, you can get inspired, you can see what's possible, and you can find out new applications or interesting work being done in this space, even if it's in different industries. My name is Felipe Flores. I am your host. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we are speaking with Elliot Smith. He's the CEO and founder of Maxwell Plus, which is a company that is using artificial intelligence to help treat and diagnose patients with prostate cancer. The way that Maxwell Plus and Elliot have gone about doing this is extremely interesting, fascinating, and they're leaders and visionaries, at least in the Australian market, if not globally. The work that they're doing can impact the lives of over 300 million men that have or are being diagnosed with prostate cancer. The way that Elliot got to starting the company and building it and now running it for 4, almost 5 years, it's phenomenal. Really inspirational entrepreneurship story with a strong angle of applied ML and AI. For anyone that's thinking about doing their own startup or in their journey, this will be a great episode for you. I hope you enjoyed. Here's the conversation with Elliot Smith. Elliot, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm doing well, Felipe. How are you?
Yeah, doing very well. Thanks for coming on the show, mate. I'm keen to pick your brain about all things health tech related and how to bring it to life in the real world. But I thought I'd ask you. I'd kick us off by asking you a bit about your origin story and how you got into data, into the world of AI, and then how you chose health tech within that. But what was it first pulled you into data and AI?
Yeah, so I suppose things started for me in my undergraduate degree, which was in electrical engineering. Naturally, a lot of software in that degree. I was more in the microelectronic side of things as opposed to power systems and the larger sort of electrical engineering. When I finished that degree, there were a couple opportunities. One, I started working in a mining company for a while, which was short-lived. Mining was not the industry for me, that's for sure. But I also had an opportunity to participate in some research at the end of my undergraduate degree, looking at kids that have cystic fibrosis. So cystic fibrosis is a quite rare disease that affects a number of different systems in the body, but one of them in particular is it creates a thick mucus in the lungs, and if that mucus doesn't get cleared out, it can get infected. So there's a lot of respiratory physiotherapy, so breathing exercises to help get that mucus out of the lungs. And the problem we were trying to tackle was that kids, especially sort of under 10 years old, they hated the physiotherapy, as you can imagine. It's sort of hour a day kind of stuff. And we were working on a project to build a Bluetooth connected physiotherapy device that allowed them to play a game on their phone as they were doing their physio. So their physio would be the controller for that game. And that was a really interesting, really wonderful project. But I think that was kind of the first time that I was looking at collecting sort of large databases of medical data and trying to do something useful with them. In this case, it was trying to track the performance and try and predict things like infection events on these kids. So that project went well. We ran some trials, built a few devices. Ultimately, it turned out to be too expensive to commercialize, but it was a great exposure, I think, to the world of medical data and data science in general. And that process, along with just a general interest in the space, then got me back to university to do a PhD. So I did a PhD in biomedical engineering, specifically around designing MRI systems, so electromagnetic modeling and optimization of the design of MRI systems for a particular application, which in this case was combined imaging and radiation therapy to do semi-autonomous cancer treatment. So a lot of that work was around the numerical modeling, simulating the design of, for those who know the space, gradient coils for these MR machines. So trading off how good your image quality could be with, minimizing inductance and resistance and just, catastrophic failure through large-scale power loss. So that was a really interesting project and I guess was my foundation into the space of AI. This was sort of, what years would this be? This was probably 5 or 6 years ago. So before, I guess, AI and big data were like the cool ways to talk about numerical modeling and optimization problems. I was working on this for the purposes of electromagnetic design. When I finished that, I sort of came to the realization that I loved academia, but it was a little bit too slow moving for me. I wanted to be out there building things, putting stuff into the world, and decided to have another run at building a startup. And at the time, I happened to know a lot about numerical modeling, optimization, and how that translated into things like AI, and also medical imaging. And without jumping too far ahead, that's kind of the point where all of this came together, and the company that I now run, Maxwell Plus, was kind of born in that collision of worlds.
Very nice, mate. Very nice. And I gotta tell you, I went to the same university that you went to, so University of Queensland, a long time before you, though. And I did computer systems engineering, so quite closely related. But I always thought that the electrical engineering side was way more hardcore than what we were doing in comp sci. We would sometimes look down on the people doing software engineering, even though some of them are very good mates of mine. No, mate, super interesting. How did you decide to start a company? What was the trigger point and some of the lead up to it that would have, I guess, increased the pressure over time and made it a clearer and clearer realization in your mind? How was that process for you?
Yeah. I mean, it was an interesting one. I think with any startup origin story, there's like that healthy mix of serendipity and I guess ignorance or arrogance, whichever way you want to look at it. So, the story we tell is, and that's how it happened, was that I was having drinks with a friend of mine, Steve Baxter, local Brisbane angel investor, and I was talking to him about my PhD, what we were doing in image-guided radiation therapy. And he said to me, I just wish we had a way to lay down, get checked, know from head to toe what was going on, and then be able to do something about it. This is where the arrogance comes in. 3 beers into this conversation, I turned to Steve and I said, I could build you one of those. Nothing really came out of that conversation directly, but a few days later, Steve got back in touch and he said, Elliot, were you serious about saying that you could build one of these? Because there are people in my world, people in my life that keep getting told, if only we'd caught this sooner. And I'm sick of that being a problem. And so I took that away and I thought about it and started to build, some actual footing under this crazy statement that I made about where could we apply analysis of data, especially medical data, to the early detection of some pretty serious diseases that are out there in the world. So things like cancer. At the time we were looking at cancer, heart disease, a number of different areas because it was all conceptual. We've ultimately settled on prostate cancer. But from the very beginning, it was about how do we find things early at a point where you should be treating them. With a background in biomedical engineering, it's very apparent the problems of things like treating unnecessary, otherwise benign issues. But knowing, where things are, should they be treated, and how best to treat them was and still is very much my ultimate goal in terms of applying data science and AI to the medical world.
It's that's awesome, man. It's a complex problem. What has made it so difficult? Obviously, for the people that don't know, can you give us kind of like a 101 on the complexity of what you're dealing with, the data capture, the type of decisions, the points in time in which that needs to be flagged? Can you give us a little bit of a landscape of this problem in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So, skipping ahead, what's now been about 4.5 years. Wow. We're a company that offers a subscription to prostate cancer testing for men that are seeking prostate cancer testing. So typically 50 and above, sometimes younger, with a strong family history. And we provide a clinical service that goes from, the day you consider getting tested all the way through to diagnosis, and applies a number of different algorithms to all the data that's collected in between. Now, some of that is time series analysis of blood test data. Some of that is combinations of blood test data and demographic factors. So you may answer things like, did your father have prostate cancer? Did your mother have breast cancer? And other factors that can combine into what ultimately comes down to a decision tool for the doctors that we employ. And those doctors use that tool to help guide men through follow-up testing all the way through to the point of an MRI, where we apply our image analysis tech that looks for signs of tumors and then uses the additional data we have on that patient to determine, is this a tumor that we should be considering a problem, or is it something that's likely to be benign and slow growing and better left alone? Ultimately after that, do you need to be passed on for a biopsy? So we do this online. Men sign up on our website. They can start getting tested. If they've been tested before, we pull in all that data that they've had existing blood tests and so on. And I guess the complexity in this comes not only in some of the AI models in isolation. Some of these imaging models take concepts from things like ResNet, but then look to apply them not only to 3D in the context of MRI, but multiple sequences in MRI, and some of those are time series in 3D. So you can have 4 or 5 dimensional data, and we're passing that into machine learning models that then combine time series blood test data to get an overall picture of essentially risk for that individual patient. So the data itself is big in the real sense of the word, and quite disparate. Despite everyone's best intentions, there is a lot of differences between, if you got an MRI in one center and then in another, you couldn't just put that data together the next day. So as much as our system involves artificial intelligence and image processing, there's probably just as much, if not more, work in around data standardization, data cleanliness, and even from time to time, manual intervention into data to say, is this what we think it is? Which I think, as somebody who started in research and then ended up in the commercial world, I think in the academia, in the literature, you often miss just how much work in real world data sets, when you don't have protocols, when you don't have standardization, is put into data cleanliness.
100%, man. And that's exactly the next bit that I wanted to ask you about. And then we can sort of work our way through the pipeline. But starting with the data gathering and the data capture, how's that process been for you guys? Obviously over time and now being quite established, being around almost 5 years, as you would know, it's less than 1% or around 1% of startups that make it to the 5-year mark. You guys are almost there, so that's amazing. how did you guys go through solving this type of problem around the data capture and being able to access the lab results and the imaging and down to that level? Because most people get stuck at the point of seeing which doctors a certain patient visited and when. If they got bloods, they might get an information that says this person got bloods, but what the results were is has been a challenge for a lot of people. How have you guys crossed that gap or that side?
So yeah, I mean that is an interesting one, and really another perhaps underappreciated aspect of building a lot of this sort of real world AI data science applications where, unlike Kaggle, nobody's got 100,000 examples in a nicely organized folder to give you. I would say that probably the first 2 to 2.5 years of our business, as we were building these models and testing ideas, in parallel, we were building clinical relationships. So this was going out to doctors, here in Australia as well as internationally, talking to them about what we wanted to achieve and working out a way to form collaborations with them over research on data that they had available. And, we've assembled a very large database on prostate cancer patients. We have hundreds of thousands of patients and multiply that by whatever to look at the data points themselves. But that was not in a single archive by any means. This is data from all over the world. Some institutions might have, provided us with data on 10 people. But the reality for us was that there just wasn't a single database that fit all the needs that we had. And likely if there was, somebody would have beat us to where we are. So a lot of our time was spent building these clinical relationships and gathering data piece by piece. And more recently, since we've been in market and approved as a medical device, having integrations into these systems more generally. So integrations into the messaging systems that deliver results between clinics. Doctors can now CC Maxwell Plus in their results, and these results end up in our system. And similarly with MRI scans, they can be pushed directly into our system. But that's 5 years of engineering effort to get there. Believe me, I even have one on my desk. Like the early days, this is how we got our MRIs. It's a CD, and it's got one scan at a time, and we pulled them off the CD because for us that's just kind of what we had to do to get the data that we needed.
Definitely, man. Definitely. And that's amazing. And I'm sure you were trying different avenues to be able to get to this data, and we've had other people in the podcast that, for example, one guy also had an AI company in the health tech space where they were doing discharge outpatient clinic scheduling. And it was based on the discharge notes, for example. And they were telling us that the main thing was the data capture, the data sending, the data cleaning. That's the biggest barrier. Did you guys find greater success in approaching doctors directly, or was it like medical centers, or was it like software companies that provided the software to the doctors? Was it something else? Was it hospitals? Did you try different avenues and then found that one that worked better for you guys?
Yeah, we certainly tried probably all of those and more. Yeah. So we approached hospitals, we approached individual doctors, large clinics, research institutions. I think we found consistently that our best results came from individual doctors who had authority and the ability to share their data under the right circumstances with us, and research-heavy organizations who are used to sharing data with people. Certainly, talking to hospitals or large clinics who, their 9 to 5 is not research. It's clinical operations. How do we optimize billing? How do we get people out of the waiting room faster? To come to them and say, hey, we'd like to share all your data, was kind of met with blank stares. They didn't know where their data was to begin with. So we found that the individuals were probably the cornerstone to it all. And another reason for that is, if you find a clinician who's very keen on solving the same problem as you, and offer them an opportunity to collaborate, and they can see the patient outcomes of what you're doing, they're going to become an internal champion for you. And most of the big institutions that we collaborate were with building a relationship with one individual clinician who then went on to champion it within their organization and sort of acted as our inside man or lady to help us through that process. So again, that relationship building side that, probably as an academic and as an engineer coming into this, I probably would have told you like, no, it doesn't matter. You just get the data and you build the thing and it'll be fine. But certainly that relationship building side in worlds of big data, nobody has this much data on their own. You really do need a network of providers to get access to this stuff.
That's awesome, man. So well done. And how did you guys come to focus on prostate cancer?
As I said, early days, we were looking at kind of whatever data we could get our hands on. We were small and excited and just wanted to build AI. But probably 1 to 2 months into really getting serious with the project that became the business, we met a local clinician here in Brisbane called Dr. Peter Swindle. So he's a local urologist. We were looking for clinicians to work with. And it happened that his passion, his interest was MRI of the prostate. He taught radiologists how to read MRI. Wow. And he really just loved this idea of building technology to help make that process better. He's, as a urologist, they do surgery as well as diagnosis. You see a lot of people end up, with that same problem, coming in too late and having to have those conversations of like, I just wish you got here a couple of years earlier. And he has, he was very impassioned about what we do and remains to this day, and said, look, I have a problem for you. That is a big problem. It affects 1 in 6 men in their lifetime. And there's an opportunity here to drastically change the way that we deal with it. And that kind of, we sold what we were doing to him and he sold the problem to us. And, we started working together, and it's, I guess the rest is history, as they say.
That's amazing, man. And I think it's so important to highlight the perseverance that is required to make a company successful, and the fact that that you have to really like keep going no matter what, and the fact that you guys were looking at lots of different types of data, sort of seeing whatever you could get your hands on, looking to build AI, looking to build the relationships, and moving forward, through the uncertainty and I guess the unknown, and making sure that you're moving forward to make at one point, I'm sure it felt like make something happen, and then something started to happen, and now, man, like look at you guys now, like it's amazing, and it shows so much determination, which is the part that's often not covered enough and not focus on enough on the startup stories that people focus on on splitting the spoils and as Eric Ries says, it's like who's going to be in the cover of magazines and how's the money going to be divided, but people don't focus on the grind to get there. So what does a company look like now? What does the company look like now?
We're still hungry for data, that's for sure. But as I said, we're in market. We're approved as a medical device in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. So we've been in market for about 12 months. which, that approval process is a hour-long conversation in itself. And we can touch on some aspects of that. But we've been operating for about 12 months. Some of the things that are really amazing to me is, we've seen thousands of patients, and we've found, numerous cases of prostate cancer in those patients that would have gone missed by the current system.
Wow.
So there are guys out there that, we looked at their data, we saw something in their data that wouldn't have been picked up otherwise, and our doctors said, we need to act. And, with the hindsight of knowing their outcomes, we acted at the right time. And, those people have what is, for prostate cancer, 98% 5-year survival rate, because we acted in time to avoid that conversation of, man, I wish we'd caught you 3 years earlier. And for me, to have that happen, we saw the first of those sort of late last year, really came back and cemented what has been, 4 or 5 years of, as you say, the grind. And, I felt a little bit prepared for it. As anyone who's done a PhD, it's like you just sit and do things that don't work for multiple years by yourself. But to get things like that happen, especially in this sector of healthcare, to really be able to see that you can make a direct outcome on, saving a life, really just, you forget about that grind pretty quickly when stuff like that happens.
That's fantastic, man. And tell me a little bit about that approval process. What was it like? Main stages, key frustrations, etc. How do you find the approval process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. Even today, like the way that the approval process works, it's not really designed for software, let alone AI. The key example I give in trying to get this point across is that in our approval documentation, so basically, you put a quality system together in your company, which is a sensible thing to do for any company. And then you create your products under that quality system and generate a big dossier about how your product performs and how it's safe for use. Ultimately, any regulatory approval is you do what you say you're going to do and you're safe for patients. But we have a whole section in our dossier about what the risk of poisoning is if you use our product, because it's designed for a world where there's a physical product that somebody could accidentally put in their mouth. And yet, as a software company, we still have to say, I promise you won't get poisoned by our product that exists as software. So that's kind of the cornerstone of the approval system. And I mean, interestingly, the world we're in right now with COVID and the pandemic is actually really having a big effect on the way that groups like the FDA are looking at approvals. They're saying, okay, this system really doesn't account for digital products well enough, and that has left us at a disadvantage in a tough time. So for example, products like FaceTime and Zoom couldn't have been used in a medical scenario because they weren't approved as medical devices. Yet, Apple, I'm sure, is more than capable of producing a secure communication channel between two people. So, they've really started to revisit how are they looking at these devices when they're primarily software as a medical device. And then, for the last couple of years, groups like the FDA have been saying, look, we see AI as almost a new category of medical device. How are we going to think about the approval process for this? What do we need to do to make sure that it maintains its safety and its performance over time? Because I think, the big allure of AI companies in the medical world is that the more patients you see, the more data you get, the better the diagnostic tool comes over time. But, there needs to be checks and balances in place because as, everybody in the AI world knows, you can overfit to your data. And if you overfit to the wrong data in the medical world, it's potentially catastrophic outcomes. if you tell a whole bunch of people that they're healthy when they're not, because 99% of your data is healthy people, and you don't have the checks and balances in there, people can die. And that's why these systems are in place, and that's why they always will and should be in place, is to make sure that technology like AI that can provide all this potential, I guess, and this is probably true for a lot of startups, gets its sort of reality check to say, look, there is a bigger world outside your startup, and we need to consider, the stark reality of the world, and we can't just let this stuff, go wild. Putting aside any crazy questions of AGI or anything like that, it's just checks and balances, make sure that it's still doing what it says it's going to do, and make sure ultimately that patients are safe.
100%. That is definitely keen. So I'll ask you more about that in a bit. But before, I wanted to ask you about with the approval process to become a medical device. Why did you guys look to, for example, be registered in multiple geographies? Were they separate processes? And was that a must-do for the company to succeed and survive longer term?
Yeah. So, I mean, interestingly, the ones we have so far were out of a logistical benefit more than anything else. So, this is very particular to Australia and the TGA. But if you're approved via CE mark, via a notified body in the European Union, the TGA recognizes that as equivalence for its own approval process. So if we get CE mark, we can be TGA approved. Now, that relationship doesn't work in the opposite direction. So for us, we said, okay, will we ever want to go to Europe? And the answer is yes, we would like to have our company operate in Europe one day. So let's go through that process, use it to have the equivalency here in Australia, and two birds with one stone kind of scenario. New Zealand was in a very similar boat. We had collaborators over there, and their system is one of primarily self-regulation under similar guidance to the CE and the TGA notified systems. So we were able to get that one up quite quickly. Now, other markets, the US is certainly on our radar. They're a little bit slower, a little bit more involved. So, it's more of a business timing decision for when we hit the FDA. But yeah, it was a little strategic one. A lot of people don't know that. And I don't remember who told me, but I'm glad that they did, because having to do that twice would have been an expensive thing to learn on the fly.
Definitely, yeah, and painful. Did you know you guys would have to be approved as a medical device when you started the company in the early days? Was it something that you knew you had to do at one point, or did it come in later?
No, it was something I knew. So having worked on the cystic fibrosis project in the past, we went through a good portion of that regulatory approval process. So I was lucky enough to have some familiarity with the process. And I mean, for anybody out there looking at AI in the medical space, get a start on this early. The first time we did it with the previous company, we said, we want to get regulated now. Better start putting all this documentation in place, and tried to squeeze what is 18 months of work into 18 weeks. And it's hell. And realistically speaking, you have to be monitoring your changes and your design updates. And that's hard to do for 18 months worth of work in 18 weeks, near impossible. So if you're doing it, two pieces of advice are get a head start and hire a professional. I mean, this time we hired somebody who's done this a dozen times over. And I'm very glad that we did, because, a lot of it is just knowing the standards back to front, understanding how they fit together, and then contextualizing that for our business. Now, having done it, could I do it again without a professional? Potentially. But if your first time regulatory approval, get somebody who knows what they're doing. You will pay dividends.
what I love about that part of the story is, it's quite often, I think, or at least it should be quite often, that people should hear the fact that if you're going to do a startup, try to learn some of it like on somebody else's dime, essentially, like get a previous experience in a different project, and then once you've had a sort of one pass in terms of learning, go and do it on your own. It sounds like that is similar to what happened in your case. How beneficial do you think was getting that first experience before doing Maxwell Plus?
Yeah, I think it was very beneficial. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's learning from experience, and then there's learning from, I guess, other people's experience. Two things that I think when I was, first time founder in that original product, I thought I could work it all out myself. And, people out there can, but it's going to take you 3 times longer than if you find somebody who knows what they're doing, ask them for help and learn it. And I mean, one of the big learnings over the last 4 years is like, just try and learn from, if you find somebody who's done it before, you can take a year of their life and they'll condense it for you into probably a 2-hour conversation about the stuff you absolutely need to know. And you've just saved yourself, 11.9 months.
Yeah.
And then you can do that again and again and again and get way, way further than you could if you were to learn this all from first principles. And I think as a technical founder, it's often a temptation to do stuff from first principles. It's just like, I want to build it all. I'm going to build all my models from scratch. Forget, what the people at Google know. They have no idea what they're doing. I'll just write all my, I'll just do it all myself. And I think the thing to recalibrate on is that you're here to solve a problem. If you're taking your idea, your project, and making it into a startup and a business, you're here to solve a problem for customers that you will hope will one day pay you. I guess the days of, tinkering and building stuff, save that for personal time, save that for pet projects, save that for the weekend. If you're founding a startup, you've kind of got to ruthlessly say, if this isn't solving the problem in the most efficient way, we're not doing it this way. And sometimes the most efficient way is horrendously inefficient, like gathering data 10 pieces at a time, but that's just life. But, certainly I've made this mistake, and I probably continue to this day, is to, I guess, overbuild, over-engineer, and just try and do everything from scratch when there's a lot of resources and tools and people out there that can shortcut you to what is ultimately the interesting stuff, which is, okay, you've built AI models that can look at medical data. That is an interesting problem. It is a hard problem, and it is a valuable problem. Now, how do you get that to 100 million people around the world? And that's kind of where we are today is, how do we take what we have and get it to 100 million people so that all of this work that we've done today wasn't just building some cool AI models that sit on a server somewhere that never, get used.
Exactly. But man, that's a huge learning, huge transformation. And I think it's the key to being a business leader, right? Where you go from, as you were saying, like the transition that you've had, where you go from, I'm going to build it all or as much as possible, and it's going to be sort of at my own pace of learning all the different areas that need to be done, versus I'm going to leverage experience and make sure that I'm getting the same quality output, if not better, in like such a small fraction of the time. And I'm going to be able to leverage other people's experience and all the time that they've spent doing this, so I can get to the interesting part of the journey faster. It's such a big change in mindset. Did you have any particular points that really helped you change that mindset?
Well, look, if I'm being totally honest, I learned by screwing it up a whole lot.
Yeah.
But, more recently, I would say there's good books and there's good people on our team, on, the investors that have invested in us that have really led me down that path. There's a great book or two great books that I think really helped me transition from pure technical into more of a business building startup founder. Was High Output Management, which is from the old CEO of Intel, just about how to be a good manager. Now, clearly a very technical role, but it's very pragmatic advice about how to manage. And once you've got more than you and a co-founder, you've got to start managing, whether you like to or not. There's a very different relationship between anyone you bring on and the original founders, and to treat them all as just extra founders does them a disservice and does you a disservice. But anyway, I digress. The second book there is it's called The Great CEO Within. It's a book out of Silicon Valley. Again, I think it's primarily aimed at technical founders, which is just like, look, close down your code for a second and just think about all of the other things that you need to think about. There are some bits in there which, certainly as a founder in Australia, it's hard to relate to. I mean, one of them is, 5 years into your business, sell down $10 million of stock and then make sure you have enough money never to worry again. And I sit here going yeah, I can't really relate to that one at the moment. But a lot of the other advice is really pragmatic and obviously aimed at technical people and can help kind of level you up from just pure technical to technical founder type level.
Nice one. That's awesome, man. And definitely everyone that works in a startup just makes so many mistakes. Every single person that I know, myself, when I've had companies, it's just at least for myself, looking back at my time in startups, it just feels like a series of never-ending mistakes. It's like mistake, but definitely that's where you get the learning. So thanks for sharing that, and definitely two good resources as well. I do want to ask you more about the AI side. Firstly, just a quick question is, why did you guys have to be approved as a medical device if you're providing software? What was the requirement there?
Yeah, so we fall under a category, funnily enough, called software as a medical device. And because the clinicians that use our software are using it in the aid of clinical decision-making, it kind of puts us into a category of clinical decision support tools. Now, we're lower risk than if we built software that did all of the work. And I think the world is decades away from an AI doctor without any human intervention. Yeah. But yeah, we still count as a medical device under that regulation.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you. And tell me about the AI side that you guys have built. So you mentioned a little bit before around some time series components, some imaging components. So image classifications, that you're taking all this data over time. Can you expand a bit more about what's at least some of the magic that's happening in the background for all the patients?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can talk about the big meaty one, which is the analysis of MRI scans. So, to contextualize for those that are not familiar with medical imaging, there's kind of two things that need to be considered. One, your images are not pixels. They're things called voxels, which is a volumetric pixel, I suppose. So instead of squares, you've got cubes. And what we're doing when we're imaging somebody is, I guess, taking an image one little slice at a time to build up a 3D model of that person. And, as ridiculous as it sounds, like, if you've ever played things like Minecraft, that's kind of a good visualization of how it works. Different blocks represent different types of tissue in the body. So the first complexity over traditional image processing and image AI is that you're in 3D, which makes, from GPU usage all the way through to everything else, it kind of just, multiplies everything somewhat exponentially. We need a lot of GPUs to train our systems. But the additional complexity that we have is that for prostate cancer and prostate imaging in particular, we use a process called multiparametric MRI. And what that means is that the same way that your camera will take a red, a blue, and a green channel, the MRI will perform, in this case, 3 different sequences. And that's kind of like one red, one blue, one green, except they're designed to measure different things other than wavelengths of light. So there's T2 weighted image, which is mainly about anatomical detail. There's a diffusion weighted image, which is looking at how water is moving through the body, which can give you an idea about functional behavior within the body. And then there's contrast enhanced imaging, which is when we, or the radiologist, injects the patient with a contrast agent. It's a metal and a sugar bound together. It's a gadolinium-based substance. And it's because things like cancer are hungry, they tend to uptake more of the sugar than anything else. And then the gadolinium in this case can be seen on the MRI as a sort of bright spot whenever there's a lot of activity with that contrast agent. So, step 1 is design an AI model that can process that. And to add some extra flavor to the mix, these 3 sequences are not taken at once. They're taken sequentially, which means that between sequence 1 and sequence 2, the patient might have rolled over, they might have moved around, just breathed in and breathed out. So you lack alignment even between the channels in your images. So there's a lot of pre-processing that goes on to try and optimally align these images. And then on top of that, that contrast imaging I was talking about, that is 4-dimensional. So we take that same 3D volume at multiple time steps to monitor how that sugar flows in and flows out over time to get an understanding of uptake and the eventual consumption and release of that sugar. And all in all, that is a lot of data. And what we've done for that, and our primary goal here is very similar to object detection algorithms, is to find an area in that 4-dimensional world, but let's just use a 2D version of it, to say this section is likely to be cancer. So our models themselves definitely take the best of what's out there in literature, but they are adapted to the complexities and to the nuances of the types of data that we have. And for things like MRI, where this data set is huge, there's not only the problem of how do you fit that all into a series of graphics cards, but very often we sort of hit a point where even if you had 1,000 graphics cards, it just wouldn't be feasible to run your convolution over this entire 4-dimensional space and then shrink it all back down and do it all again, let alone, this concept of batch sizes. Very often our batch size is like 2 if we're lucky. So, from our perspective, it's how do we take what was designed in these algorithms, these sort of best-in-class algorithms, and apply it to the scenario that we have. We're, as a company, we're not designing the next ResNet, but we are taking these ideas and applying them to a problem domain that very few people are looking at. And I think that's our value as a company, is being able to combine this understanding of AI and this understanding of medical data and how those two things can come together to ultimately deliver value.
It's amazing, man. That's incredible. And how standardized are the outputs of the MRIs that you get from different machines or different hospitals? How close to one another are they?
So there's definitely differences, which can be good and bad. So, for us, we've aimed to collect an international, multi-institution, multi-reader, widespread demographic data set because, and the reason that's bad, I should say, is that it takes a long time. It's really hard to get that kind of diversity in data because we've seen that in the medical world, some AI models, trained on maybe just one or two institutions worth of data, end up becoming good predictors of not the underlying disease state, but which institution the data came from. And if you know that this one is a late stage center and this one is an early stage center, you can get pretty good performance just by making that guess. So for us, it's really making sure that we're not biasing our data set to any of those kind of factors.
Man, there is so much there. I'm so impressed. What effect, sort of, if any, what effect, if any, on your company is going to is the My Health Record going to have? That obviously Australia, or for the people listening that don't know, and we have a big audience overseas as well. So in Australia, the government's creating this record to pull together an individual's health records from different providers. Imaging doesn't sound like it's in the medium term, or definitely not in the short term. And my understanding, at least, is that it's going to be, at the beginning, a record that's going to be very high level to say you went to this doctor on this date, you got bloods on this date, but no results of the test. So that's why I was phrasing the question, though, sort of, do you anticipate any effect, if any? And do you know more about the timeframes when that's coming down the pipes?
Yeah, so I mean, your statements are absolutely correct. From what I've seen, it is quite high level. The intention in the long term is to get more data in there, and I'll say it's a wonderful initiative. I think centralizing all this healthcare information, if protected and with the right privacy controls and the right transparency, is a brilliant idea. I guess my worry is about execution and adoption. Execution, because it's hard to engineer anything for 20 million people. And the government will have a fair crack at that. And I'm sure they'll get there eventually. But adoption seems to be a big issue as well. So, we don't currently integrate with My Health Record because there's no additional business value for us, but we have members that have specifically asked us, do you integrate? If you do, I don't want to be part of this, because there is, underlying skepticism about the government's ability to protect that data, and, I'm making no comment on what their ability is or how safe it is. But even from the clinical side, and this has been an interesting one, is that certain clinicians who feel that they're hard done by in the way of rebates, for example. So if the rebate for seeing a certain type of clinician has not moved in the last 8-10 years, and they feel like the costs of running their business has grown but their remuneration hasn't, we've seen clinicians say, well, actually, as a fraternity, we're actually telling My Health Record that until you put this rebate up, we're not even going to consider it, because the logistics of implementing something like this aren't justified by the amount that we're getting paid. So I think the beauty of having something done by the government is that it's mass scale. The difficulty of having something done by the government is politics. And I think ultimately it's going to be a battle of politics to determine how much uptake it gets.
Exactly. Now, well, I keep saying this, man, but I am so impressed by you guys just taking the initiative and sorting out kind of like everything that you need in order to make this a reality, instead of waiting around for a cleaner path to be sort of made in front of you. So no, definitely kudos for doing all that. And tell me what's coming up next for Maxwell Plus. What's the future of the company? What type of things are you guys looking forward to working on? Obviously, things that you can share, but what's coming up in the future for the company?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 for us is focused mainly around getting this out to more people. So, we're open for business. We got men signing up every day through our website. It's just trying to spread the word, try and let the world know that we're out there. We're doing things the way they should have been done for a long time, and you can finally get that. And I guess from a more technical perspective, we're starting to look, for a long time we've been, the way we phrase it is day one to diagnosis. So our job is to get you to a diagnosis early enough that it makes a difference, but without any sense of overtreatment. Now, the question that's been ticking around in our heads for a while is, if you have had treatment or you choose to go on to what's called active surveillance, which is let's just watch this and determine when to treat, the algorithms that we applied to do an initial diagnosis applied just as well to monitoring your diagnosis over time. So how can we then go to provide ongoing support to really see these men through from, day one to, day infinity, whenever that is, and continue to provide, real clinical value to these men.
That is so exciting. And for anyone listening, at what point should they think about going and checking out the website to see if they should sign up, if one of their loved ones should sign up, if one of their friends should sign up? Are there particular points where the listeners can be directing people to Maxwell Plus?
Yeah, definitely. Look, if you're a man and you're over 50 and you happen to live in Australia, check it out right now for yourself. If you have a family history of prostate cancer, a lot of people don't have this conversation, but try and find out. It may be appropriate as young as 40, depending on the situation. We do a lot of pre-screening to work out if we can help you. So, you can sign up and we'll let you know. But yeah, definitely check that out. Or if there's somebody in your life that fits those demographics. I mean, I would dare to say that most of us know a man in their 50s from somewhere, whether it's parents or themselves. So definitely have a look. If you're interested in this space in general, we have been quiet on this for a while, but we're just about to start kicking it off again, we're building up our mailing list again, starting to put out not only medical information, but technical info about what we're doing, in terms of AI and how we're building these big, distributed TensorFlow models and so on. So even people that aren't ready for the product, you can jump on, hear about what we're doing, and just keep up to date with all things Maxwell. And yeah, I mean, I look forward to seeing everyone.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That's the idea of the newsletter sounds fantastic. And when the audience is thinking about, who can go to, who should be checking out the website, I should have included in the list. Think about your colleagues as well. So not only obviously yourself, your family members, your friends, loved ones, but also colleagues. We definitely have people at work. Today, one of my colleagues and I were discussing breast cancer in our families, and in the case of my colleague, she had it, and a lot of people in her family. In my case, my wife's family has likelihood to have breast cancer. Sometimes these conversations are extremely helpful, and so don't forget your colleagues. Elliot, mate, I just looked at the time. I can't believe this has flown by. It's been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for all the good work that you're doing. Extremely necessary. Thank you for the perseverance, the tenacity. Please keep going, I guess needless to say. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
That brings this episode to conclusion. Thank you so much for listening. Please find us on datafuturology.com or on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram as Data Futurology. Also go to datafuturology.com/podcast to find the show notes for this and any other episodes. If you like this episode, it would mean a lot to us if you could leave us a review wherever you listen to our podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it was helpful and valuable for you. Thanks again, and see you next time.